Well, welcome to the afternoon session of the Public Accountability Committee's inquiry and into the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This afternoon, we have two portfolios which we will be reviewing. The first is better regulation and innovation with the Minister, Kevin Anderson. The second is finance and small business with the Finance Minister, the Honourable Damien Tudorhope. We will commence by swearing on the witnesses that are accompanying you, Minister. Minister, I note you don't need to be sworn in. I remind you, you remain on the oath that you have as a Member of Parliament and as a Minister of the Crown. Starting with you, Ms Webb, could you please give your name, your position, and then either take an oath or an affirmation?
Rose Webb, Deputy Secretary, Better Regulation Division in the Department of Customer Service. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thanks, Ms Webb. Mr Tansey?
Yeah, my name is John Tansey. I'm the Executive Director of Policy and Strategy in the Better Regulation Division of the Department of Customer Service. And I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Mr Gavrilatis?
And I'm Andrew Gavrilatis. I'm the Executive Director of Community Engagement in the Better Regulation Division of the Department of Customer Service, and I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Minister. The opportunity is yours if you wish to take it for a brief opening statement.
Yeah, I will. Thanks, Mr Shoebridge, if that is okay. I might just start and thank everybody for their time. We appreciate it's all very busy for everybody in these very, very difficult circumstances. So thanks to everybody for coming together. Look, and we appreciate the opportunity to further talk about and explore the good work that we believe the government is doing to get the balance right in what is already having a significant impact on the economy and some tenants that are having difficulty keeping up with their rent payments. The new package that was brought in earlier has been designed to support all of New South Wales tenants and landlords facing financial hardship due to COVID-19. Mr Shoebridge, I might just outline briefly the 6-month support package. Includes a 6-month moratorium on applications for forced evictions due to rent arrears for tenants impacted by COVID-19 and compulsory requirements for landlords and COVID-affected tenants to work together to renegotiate rents in good faith. We want to help tenants and landlords to renegotiate tenancies so they can continue wherever possible to create stability while the Commonwealth financial support is being rolled out to those who need it. The package also immediately put a 60-day stop on new termination notices being made against COVID-affected tenants who fall into rent arrears and also extended the notice periods for tenants on fixed-term leases to 3 months. And lastly, these temporary measures seek to find that balance that meets the needs of tenants who are financially disadvantaged by COVID-19 and landlords who require rental income to meet their financial obligations. Thanks, Mr Shoebridge.
Thanks, Minister. I appreciate that brief summary. We'll now hand over to the opposition for questioning, and I think Mr Searle will kick us off.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you, Minister, for you and your staff and officials for coming and speaking with the committee this afternoon. And you mentioned the package recently passed by the Parliament last week, which contained a number of measures relating to residential tenancies in terms of landlords as well as tenants. Minister, can you inform the committee what is your government's time frame for implementing the landlord and tenants hardship arrangements put into Section 232 of the Property and Stock Agents Act?
Mr Searle, thank you in relation to your question. What has happened since Parliament was resumed the other week in relation to the COVID-19 emergency bill that went up in relation to the hardship package. There were discussions in relation to that. We don't believe that at this point in time the hardship package is the right way to go. We believe that the balance we've got in place in relation to finding the the right balance between tenants and landlords, giving them the opportunity to be able to come to a fair and reasonable arrangement. For example, if the tenant is finding it hard to pay rent because they are financially impacted by COVID, and then they can have that discussion with their landlord and be able to come up with an agreeable solution.
Oh, well, thanks for that, Minister. But in relation to the COVID-19 legislation amendment, Emergency Measures Miscellaneous Bill 2020, and in particular the landlord and tenants hardship package, just so I absolutely understand, the Legislative Council inserted that change to the Property and Stock Agents Act to enable the Property Services Compensation Fund to be able to be used to assist residential landlords and their tenants who are suffering hardship. The lower house accepted that amendment. Your government voted for that recommendation by the Parliament. Is it your evidence to this committee that your government is now intending to not implement that change?
Mr. Searle, the recommendation was to look at the Property Services Compensation Fund. And can I say to you that in relation to the Property Services Compensation Fund, it's used for those people who are facing severe hardship on the back of being ripped off by agents and conveyancers. Now, the Property Services Compensation Fund is a last resort for those victims. Now, currently, sitting in the Property Services Conservation Fund is around $9 million. Now, if you take a look at some of the numbers that have been presented to us, there are approximately 250,000 landlords who would be eligible to receive that hardship fund, and you were talking about a fund of providing landlords $2,500 per landlord. So running up the numbers of 250,000 landlords, if you were to give $2,500 to each of those eligible landlords, that's a total of $625 million. At present, the Property Services Compensation Fund currently contains around $9 million. So if you were to divide the current compensation fund by 250,000 eligible landlords, that would equate to $36 for each landlord. So we don't believe that that was the right way forward.
Sorry, Minister, we just missed that number. Can you just give that number again? How much per landlord?
So you're saying, Mr. Graham, that at $2,500 per landlord, now that was the recommendation that was put forward by the upper house. Is that correct? Just so I've got that right?
Yep, that's correct.
Thank you. So $2,500 payout to, we believe, approximately 250,000 eligible landlords. That equates to around $625 million. Currently,
Look, Minister, just on that, Minister.
Yeah,
sorry.
Well, I think the Minister was just about to round it out. So, Minister, finish your answer and then we'll come back.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Searle, so currently you requested, or the opposition requested, a hardship fund to be taken from the Property Services Compensation Fund. Well, that fund again is for a last resort for people who are out of pocket after they've been ripped off by agents or conveyancers, and it currently contains $9 million. The hardship fund you're talking about would equate to around $625 million, and if you divide those numbers, it comes back
Minister,
to
Minister, you're repeating yourself. The issue is this: not every landlord would make the claim. My understanding is not all of those funds are drawn down, but also there's the statutory interest fund that can be drawn on to put money into the Property Compensation Fund. How much money is currently in the statutory interest fund?
I'll ask the Fair Trading Commissioner to respond to that, please, Mr. Searle.
I'll take that on notice. I might be able to give you an answer during the course of the hearing.
Okay, and just on that, whatever, and there'd be nothing to stop the Treasury from topping the fund up should there be a need. The point is, Parliament has given a recommendation, because as you know, the upper house has no control over money bills. It's made a recommendation for a hardship fund. Your government in the lower house accepted that. And now you're not proposing to implement the recommendation of Parliament. What alternative are you proposing?
Mr. Searle, it was a recommendation. So we have agreed to accept the recommendation to further assess and it's a continuous improvement exercise in meeting the response and challenges and monitoring the situation, which we will consult with community and stakeholders. So it was a recommendation to consider, and we will continue on a daily basis, which is what we would normally do across all those who monitor this very difficult situation for tenants and landlords on a daily basis.
Well, Minister, your government's approach of using a land tax rebate will only assist something like 16% of landlords and their tenants. That means 84% of landlords and their tenants are getting no support from your government facing this difficulty. So what measures are you offering for the 84% who are not currently being assisted?
Now, just to be clear, Mr. Searle, you're talking about landlords still?
Well, yes, if you give assistance to landlords, they will assist their tenants. But the issue is, what are you doing for landlords and tenants? Given that your package, at least what you've announced so far, will help very few people.
We think it will help a significant number of people, Mr. Searle, particularly in relation to three parts to what we are talking about. It is about mediation, or it's about negotiation first. It is about mediation and then going through to arbitration. And we are saying that for the first time ever, the negotiation phase right at the start with tenants and landlords, and the services that are available to them, not only from guidelines on the Fair Trading website, but also there is the opportunity for those who would seek further information to ring Fair Trading, ring Service New South Wales to start that process. And if it does not progress, and can I say that given the numbers around the asking rents in terms of in Sydney are coming down, so rents are coming down and available properties are going up. So from a landlord's perspective, you would prefer, I would suspect anyway, to have someone in your property. So back to the negotiation phase, and we're seeing good responses from Fair Trading at the start of that negotiation process.
Minister, you can't negotiate if you don't have any money, if you've lost your job. That's, I think, a difficulty with the approach. Now, you have confirmed through questions on notice that no additional staff have been engaged by Fair Trading to provide additional mediation services required to support the negotiations between landlords and tenants. And mediation times are 30 days plus, during which time tenants continue to accrue rental arrears. So what are you doing to shorten those times before you can get to a mediation? And then even when you get to the tribunal, often there aren't mediators skilled in this area, and then there are actually further delays in getting to arbitration. Your system of fair trading is clogged with unacceptable delays. If people don't have the money, how can they get a result through the system?
Trevor, did that ending on a question resolve your point of order?
Yeah, I think it did. It was taking a hell of a long time to get there, but anyway.
All right, we got the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Schubert. Mr. Searle, I would like to answer that if I may. Significant resources, not only from the government to the New South Wales Tenants Union, but also to Fair Trading in terms of the professional skills that are available. I've got some numbers here just that I'd like to make an observation on in talking about, you know, the backlog that you say Fair Trading have received and how cumbersome and slow. Well, as of last Friday, Fair Trading received 5,294 calls about the rental moratorium. Now, these include Service New South Wales received 2,615 total calls re tenancy moratorium, and Fair Trading has received 2,679 total enquiries. And just breaking them down further, because we absolutely need data to drive good policy, and it allows us on a daily basis to assess and adapt and respond to the challenges. So to put all of this in perspective, the Fair Trading hotline shows 97% of callers were simply seeking further information, with 3%, fewer than 3%, needing assistance with negotiation or mediation support. Now, further breaking that down, again, I'm labouring the point because I believe data will continue to give us what we need to do to support tenants and landlords. To put it in perspective, Fair Trading or our departments have received fewer than 0.6% of people who have a current residential tenancy in New South Wales. We've been asked to mediate on behalf of 0.005% of current residential tenancies. Now, that demonstrates overwhelmingly tenants and landlords are working together during this difficult time. So something that we are monitoring, Mr. Searle. I take it very seriously. In my view, we do need to look after the people, and if you put people first, then good policy will follow, and that's the way we're trying to run this.
Well, how are you going to shorten the 30+ days it takes to get mediation?
Well, Mr. Searle, I'll ask Mr. Gavrilatos to come in and provide further information on that.
In terms of the tenancy intervention that Fair Trading has implemented, we have staff that will turn around those negotiations within 14 days. And in fact, we're doing it much sooner than that. But at the moment, it's with 14 days. We're focusing on that as a matter of urgency.
All right, Minister, you can direct the money from the statutory interest fund into the property compensation fund, can't you? Or are you the minister for that fund?
No, I'm not. What I can do, Mr. Searle, is refer that question to those, including the Fair Trading Commissioner.
As I understand the legislation, that would be possible if the property compensation fund needed to be replenished for the purposes for which it was set up. And I do have an answer on the stat interest account now. It's $232,367,916.30 as at December of May.
And roughly how much does it increase year on year?
I'll check
I think it's about.
and come back.
Okay. Thank you.
And it depends a little bit on what it's used for, over time, and the return on investment and things like that.
Okay. Minister, have you received any representations from Qantas about its being subject to the general duties under the Work Health and Safety legislation?
Mr. Searle, I'll have to take that on notice. We've received. I'll just check with the Fair Trading Commission on this.
I'll speak as in response of Safe Work. So Safe Work has had some engagement with Qantas in relation to its work health and safety practices.
Please tell us about that engagement and its result.
One second, Mr. Searle. If I may interrupt there, could I ask what that has to do with residential tenancies, sir?
Well, no, but you're also the Minister for Safe Work. This is about the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. My understanding is those interactions may well have to do with workplace safety and hygiene in the context of the pandemic. So again, I'm asking what has been the nature of the interaction and what is the result of the interaction with Qantas?
Mr. Searle, thank you for your question. It's greatly appreciated. On the 1st of May, I refer you to a letter received to Damien Tudor-Hope, MLC, Leader of the Government of the Legislative Council, on the 1st of May, where the request was for a Public Accountability Committee inquiry, and I refer you to the third paragraph under the signature of Mr. David Shoebridge.
I know where you're going. I just might make something clear.
Sure.
I think the Minister has come here primarily to deal with residential tenancies as well as some of the issues in relation to the building regulation. Minister, if you're not in a position to deal with other matters, I think they fall within the terms of reference, but if you're not in a position to deal with them, and nor your officials, you are, of course, in a position to take them on notice, given the nature of the invitation that went to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Shoebridge. And I will just reaffirm that it was the hearing to be on residential and commercial leases. So we've prepared today for you in relation to
I accept that, Minister. And as I say, if neither you nor your officials are in a position to answer matters outside of that, you are perfectly entitled to take the matter on notice.
Thanks, Mr. Shoebridge. We will take that matter on notice. Thank you.
Minister, when you take that question on notice, which was in relation to the agency's interaction, can you also take on notice what interaction you or your office have had with that employer or with that matter?
Certainly, Mr. Graham.
Thank you. I think we're handing over to our colleague, Ms. Yusos.
That's okay, you keep going.
I might ask then, Minister, in relation to flammable cladding, in relation to the building part of this terms of reference that we indicated may come up. People are currently at home in their houses. Some of those have got dangerous flammable cladding on the exterior. At the moment in New South Wales, there is no fund to rectify, no standalone agency, no centralised risk assessment to assist those people or those properties. All those things exist in Victoria. It's now been 38 weeks since the Building Commissioner put on your desk his recommendations about how to deal with this dangerous flammable cladding crisis. You've provided no explanation as to why you have not acted. Why have you not acted?
Ms. Ward. Ms. Ward, on the point of order.
Thank you. I would be appreciative if the member would resist the opportunity to give a speech and perhaps bring himself to the question.
Well, look, I accept that
question. Why have you not acted?
Mr. Graham, look, and Ms. Ward, members are entitled to put a question in context, but I would urge members, if they can, to get to the question as rapidly as possible.
Why have you not acted, Minister?
Sorry, Mr. Graham.
38 weeks later, why have you not done a single thing on this issue?
Mr. Graham, again, we're here today for residential tenancies. There are plenty of other opportunities through questions on notice to provide that, and we're happy to receive those through the other forum.
Well, Chair, I'll just indicate I thought the Minister was alerted to the fact we'd be asking questions about building. I'd be open to your guidance there.
Well, indeed, I think, Minister, it might be useful to quickly check with your officials whether or not I think some informal communication went to your officers in relation to addressing matters in relation to buildings, but we might see if we can clarify that before we come back to the opposition. And we'll go to Mr. Borzak now.
Excuse me. I had a number of questions on building too, but if the Minister's indicating he's not prepared to receive them, then not much point in asking them, is there? Well, I might just, in general terms, Minister, do you intend to bring the Design and Building Practitioners Bill on when we come back on the 2nd of June?
Thanks, Mr. Borzak, for your question again. I'm happy to take that on notice. So we're here today and very happy to talk about what we're doing to support tenants and landlords during what is a very, very difficult time and a challenging time, and looking after the people as we've spoken about. So that's what we've been focusing on, and we're here today to talk about that, if that's all right. But happy to take a question on notice.
All right. I have got one which you probably will have to take on notice, and you wouldn't be ready for it anyway. Minister, I understand that your office has had representations from the paintball industry outlining all the precautions that they had put in place ready to get started again. Have you had such representations to your knowledge?
I'll take that on notice, Mr. Borzak. Again, that's an interesting and a very important industry. So we'll take that on notice and come back to you ASAP.
Good, thanks very much. I'm finished for the moment.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Borzak. Minister, I would ask you to just check with your office whether or not advice was received about the extent of the question in extending to buildings regulations. If you could do that and have those inquiries done while this session is proceeding, that would be very useful.
Mr. Shoebridge, I've just done that, and the short answer is no. It comes back to the correspondence we received addressed to the Honourable Damien Tudor Hope MLC on the 1st of May, that it is about residential and commercial leases. And I contacted Mr. Tudor Hope, Mr. Shoebridge, to reaffirm that it was on residential tenancies in my space.
All right. Well, I have different messages being provided to me. Maybe we can both try and clarify that in the next 10 minutes or so. Minister, given the government's amendments to the Rental Tenancies Act as part of the Emergency Measures Bill that Parliament just passed, won't provide long-term support for renters who we know will become unemployed or underemployed as a result of the coming economic downturn, what are your plans now to assist renters in the long term?
Thanks, Mr. Shoebridge. Part of the package brought forward to support tenants and landlords is to ensure that they were supported not only from the negotiation, the mediation and arbitration that we're putting forward, and the $2.5 million from the tenants for the tenants union to provide extra resources, the increase in support from fair trading, the JobKeeper and Job Seeker payments, assistance and support package provided by the federal government has been put in place. So we're very mindful of making sure that, hence the moratorium, the 60 days and the 90 days, to ensure that by the time those JobKeeper or Job Seeker payments were starting to be received by households and residential tenancies, that they would then be in a position to have some form of funds or money coming into their house, then they could start that negotiation with landlords. And landlords ultimately would have the discussion as well to land on an agreed position where they would be able to move forward.
But Minister, I think a number of people have asked this of the government. What if they don't agree? And given the financial packages that your government's put forward is limited at most to $2,500, absent agreement, we're likely to see renters evicted and homelessness rise, aren't we?
Mr. Shoebridge, what we're seeing is the negotiations between tenants and landlords in the first instance, and then through to mediation. And what the numbers, and again, I come back to the data, because we are consistently responding to challenges in consultation with our community and stakeholders. The data is not supporting that that there is a significant challenges. If there were, we would certainly be addressing them. So we believe we have struck the right balance at this point in time to be able to support those tenants and landlords moving forward.
But Minister, the small number of formal approaches for mediation, rather than meaning that there's no pain out there and no impending crisis, it just may mean that people find it very hard to engage with your package of reforms, and they're not starting, let alone getting to the end of the mediation process you've put in place. There's more than one way of looking at that data, isn't there?
Well, there is, Mr. Shoebridge, and you're right, and we certainly acknowledge there is pain out there, and there is pain across many sectors. In the residential tenancy space that we talked about, further data tells us, as of last Friday, only 45 cases, notwithstanding the numbers that I spoke about earlier, only 45 cases have resulted in fair trading officers completing a mediation. Now, from that total of the 45 cases, 27 cases of mediations ended with an agreed outcome between the landlord and tenant. 5 cases of mediations concluded with parties being unable to agree. 7 cases concluded with one of the parties being unwilling to participate in the negotiation, and 6 cases were from non-COVID impacted tenants. So Mr. Shoebridge, it is something that we consistently monitor. We absolutely want to ensure that from the 39 that we are working with and have worked with, fair trading stands ready, willing and able to assist right across the board. But that's not to say that we won't look at and continue to improve. In my view, again, I come back to where we started. I know people are hurting. I know people are struggling. I know this is a very, very difficult time, and it is incumbent upon us to look after the people we represent. So my focus is people, and then we'll let the politics take care of itself.
Well, Minister, I agree with you. It's incumbent upon politics to find a solution. But I'll put this proposition to you. There are millions of people who rent in New South Wales. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people losing their job or being stood down in serious financial circumstances. And you're putting to this committee that you've got a mechanism in place that has dealt with 45 instances through mediation. Minister, that would suggest your mechanism is not doing its job of helping the substantial number of renters in need, wouldn't it?
Mr. Shoebridge, I look at that from a different perspective, and I value your opinion. I look at it that our system is working, and why I say that, 298,000 page views about rental assistance, rental tenancy, residential tenancies, all of that space has been picked up on the website. Now, from there, some are choosing to call, and while on hold, they are taking the details in relation to the information on the web, and others are holding on to get further information. And again, only 39 have come through. So I'm a bit like you, that I question numbers and go, okay, is this working? What have we got to do? The low numbers, what does that tell us? It tells us that of the 298,000 hits on our website, the calls are 4,000 or 5,000 calls coming through. We are able to manage some of those negotiations and those mediations and ending in an agreeable position.
Well,
not all, Mr. Shoebridge, not all, but we are working on it.
We'll have to agree to disagree what those numbers suggest about the efficacy of the state arrangements. But could I ask you if you've had a look at the May Equity Economics report on supporting economic recovery in New South Wales? That's been the only comprehensive report that I've seen that has dealt with the prospect of increasing homelessness from unemployment. Their assessment is that with an increase in unemployment that we would expect in New South Wales of between 5 and 10%, we'll see an increase in the number of homeless people of between, I think it's 22.8% and 46.5%. Has your department reviewed that report? And if so, have they put measures in place to protect people from homelessness?
Mr. Shoebridge, I haven't seen that report. We do a lot of community consultation, stakeholder engagement to ensure that we are trying to cover as many bases as we can. I'll ask the Fair Trading Commission if she's familiar with that report.
I'm not myself personally familiar with that report. We've been doing a lot of work with our colleagues in the Department of Communities and Justice who have portfolio responsibility for homelessness, and we'll continue to do that.
But Minister, your portfolio responsibility is to prevent homelessness. Surely you and your department should be looking at these kind of credible reports and putting in place practical measures to prevent homelessness in the first place.
We look at many reports, Mr. Shoebridge, and we also talk to stakeholders. We talk to those who are on the ground. We get our feedback from the 5,500 that we've spoken to over the phone. We know that there is a challenge. We know people are hurting. We know these are very, very difficult times. So the information we gather is a continuous improvement exercise about assessing the challenges going forward.
Well, Minister, I'll put this proposition to you. The bulk of your measures in terms of rental relief are deferred rental payments. We're likely to see a wave of unemployment strike as job seeker is either wound back or reversed, if that happens. We will see a toxic mix then at the end of this year of unpaid deferred rental payments and increasing unemployment. Are you aware of the prospect of that coming from September onwards?
we've workshopped many scenarios, Mr. Shoebridge, going forward about what the future looks like for residential tenancies. That's why we believe, from our perspective, in terms of what we do, is to sincerely hope that the economy continues to bounce back, and when from a residential tenancy perspective, those who are suffering as a result of financial impact from COVID-19, that after June, July, August, as jobs start to come back online and the economy gets driven again, that and it comes along with the federal government's JobKeeper, Job Seeker program. And again, we have no control over that. So what I look at is, what is that? And you're right to point out, what is that period, that precipice from where we are today to JobKeeper, Job Seeker, whatever that means in terms of the federal government. I want to make sure that those people who are financially hurting due to COVID have their job back by then, and we can start to get back to return to normal, and they can start to get back to where they were previously.
But Minister, you're not telling me that you're engaging in this policy debate on some sort of hopeful premise that unemployment isn't going to surge, are you? You're not conducting your policy analysis on the basis of sort of hope and prayer, are you? You're looking at the hard figures that are coming from the Federal Treasury, from the New South Wales Treasury, that we're going to face a surge in unemployment. You're simply saying you hope everyone will keep a job isn't an answer, Minister.
Mr. Shoebridge, we are certainly basing our work with tenants and landlords through to fair trading and NCAT on the data that we are receiving, and the forecasting that not only those around the table here who are supporting today to provide information to you, looking at that data, talking to those people who are on the front line, who are hurting, what's their feelings, what's their thoughts and processes going forward. So we want to ensure that, like everyone does, we want to ensure the economy kicks back so that people can once again take control of their finances.
Minister, that's great. We all will join in a big kumbaya moment, hoping the economy bounces back. But every single credible economist is saying we're going to have a surge in unemployment. 5 to 10% seems to be a fairly modest likely prediction of where the employment was going. We're going to have people who have, under your policy settings, large rental arrears deferred. And those deferments will come due exactly when this unemployment surge hits in September, October, November. And you don't have a policy response to it other than a hope. Can you give us some comfort that there's something more than hope?
The policy response, Mr. Shoebridge, in relation to you were saying deferred payments, is that, again, I come back to the three parts to it, the negotiation, the mediation and the arbitration. So right at the start, why it's so important that landlords and tenants have that mediation and negotiation phase is because it's up to the landlord and the tenant to agree whether to reduce their rent, to waive their rent, or to defer their rent. So we hear a lot and see, and I'm sure you would too, that there will be this rental balloon at the end of all this, that people will suffer this rental shock. The discussions right at the very start set the benchmark. There's no formal hard policy. There's no formal documentation, nothing in black and white to say that a rent reduction becomes a balloon at the other end. It's up to the landlord and the tenant to have those discussions to say, look, okay, I'm happy to drop your rent by 30%. And the tenant goes, okay, great, I'm happy to meet you halfway, fair and reasonable. What's it look like going forward? They have those discussions to say, well, let's just leave that as status quo going forward until we get to September, October, and then we can have a further discussion. We've got examples firsthand, Mr. Shoebridge, of where that has occurred.
Well, Minister, I'm not entirely sure I followed that answer, but am I to understand that you acknowledge there's going to be a rental shock at some point? What's your department telling you about when that rental shock, that crunch is going to come? What's Ms. Webb telling you? Her analysis is when that shock is going to hit.
Sorry, Mr. Shoebridge, I think you may have misunderstood me. Right at the start, when we talk about the negotiation, say between the tenant and the landlord, if that fails, it goes to mediation with fair trade and then goes to arbitration with the tribunal. right at the start, the tenant and the landlord can discuss what they do with the rent. They can either waive the rent, they can either defer the rent, or they can come to some other arrangement.
Minister, I get the process. I'm not asking you again about the process. Assuming that has worked and a bunch of tenants, thousands of tenants and landlords have agreed to defer their rental, what is your department telling you will be the effect of that deferral? When is the debt going to come due? When are we likely to see people unable to meet the payments? When is, as you say, the rental shock going to hit?
Well,
and if you can't answer it, maybe Ms. Webb has some details.
Mr. Shoebridge, with all due respect, Mr. Shoebridge, it's a hypothetical. We're dealing with the data, and as you say, there are thousands. You're saying there are thousands of people who have got this rent waive or this rent deferral that's going to be at the other end. Our data is not telling us that many have come to an agreement, and the numbers that I reiterated earlier, when you talk about 0.006 and 0.05 of those, there's the asking rents are coming down, 5.7 in Sydney and houses, and 3.7 in units. So there has never been a better time to negotiate, and we're doing everything we can to support them, and the data tells us that people are coming to arrangements.
Well, Minister, your data is showing that your scheme is assisting 0.006% of renters. It cannot be your evidence that that's the scale of the rental crisis in New South Wales. You're surely not putting that forward as your evidence, are you?
So what I'm relating to, Mr. Shoebridge, is COVID related. So everything we're talking about here is COVID related. So that's from our COVID related data. And when we look at when it all kicked in, which was in early April to where we are today, and I've just quoted to you numbers from Friday. So, when you look at the COVID related data that we are dealing with, those numbers that I spoke to you about are what we deal with and how we assess going forward.
Minister, can I put this proposition to you, and you can agree or disagree? If you're working on the assumption, based upon that data, that the COVID-19 related economic crisis that we're facing is only impacting 0.005 or 0.006% of tenants, then your data is going to drive us into a policy disaster, because that in no way represents the scale of the economic crisis we're facing relating to COVID. I put that proposition to you to agree or disagree.
What I will say, Mr. Shoebridge, is in relation to the amount of tenants in New South Wales, and there's something in the vicinity of, and my numbers, Ms. Webb, around about 900,000, would that be right? So about 900,000 tenants. Since COVID came in, Fair Trading has received, as of last Friday, 5,294 calls about the rental moratorium. There's been something in the vicinity of 240,000 hits on the website. So people are accessing, people are searching for information, and Fair Trading is being able to, on the back of the measures that have been put in place, either find the answer they want online, have come through to a telephone call contact of 37 or whatever it was I said earlier, and then and most of them have come to an agreement. I think 7 are going through to arbitration. So we're working on that data.
But no, we've had that data before. Minister, are you keeping data? Is there a requirement for landlords and tenants to register their informal agreements about rent deferrals or rent reductions? What proportion of the agreements out there have actually been registered?
I'll take it on notice, Mr. Shoebridge, but I'm asking Fair Trading Minister if she could provide further.
I don't think there's a formal requirement to register. There's no requirement to register at least a residential tenancy lease with the Office of Registrar General in any case, and variations wouldn't be registered either.
The opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Minister, under your government's policy of land tax rebates, there doesn't appear to me to be any obligation on landlords who receive that public money, ensuring it is passed on for the benefit of their tenants. Can you confirm whether that is the case or not?
Mr. Searle, the land tax component is not in my remit. Mr. Tudor-Hope, who's coming in after here, you can certainly ask that question of him.
Okay, I'll ask a question to you. Minister, it's the case, isn't it, that Safe Work is still the regulator for work health and safety laws, even in the COVID pandemic? That remains the case, isn't it?
Could you please, again, I don't want to be, Mr. Searle.
Minister, it's a very general question related to the portfolio. Notwithstanding what you say, well, Minister, perhaps if you are able to answer this basic question about your portfolio, maybe Ms. Webb could indicate to us whether or not Safe Work remains the regulator for work health and safety in this state.
Mr. Searle, please. We are here today. Happy to take any further questions in relation to my portfolio on notice. I'm very happy, and you know that, and we correspond a lot, so very happy to do that. I would really like, and I'm grateful for your time and others as well, because every time we ask a question helps us to better understand what we need to do as a government to drive forward and help those and create the policy we need to support tenants and landlords. So,
well, Minister, I might return to where the chair was heading. Can you, just to return to that, the scale of that rental shock coming down the line, can you tell us, do you have any data about how many of these rental agreements do have people deferring, going into arrears? Have you got any sense of the scale of that?
Mr. Graham, I can ask Mr. Gavrilatos that question.
Well, every negotiation that fair trading is involved in, we are aware of whether it's a deferral or a waiver. So yes, we do have that information.
Right, but the minister's indicated that's a tiny handful of cases. Can you give us any sense across New South Wales of how many of all these hundreds of thousands of tenants have got deferred rent that might lead to this rental shock?
I can only give you the information that we have, where we have intervened as fair trading. I cannot give you the broader information.
Yeah, so you're referring to the 45 cases?
I'm referring to those cases that we've intervened in. Obviously, more broadly, landlords and tenants must be coming to agreements on a daily basis.
Yeah. And Minister, you really have, in setting your policy, you've got no real sense of how many people might be at risk of that rental cliff, that rental shock with deferred payments. Is that fair?
Mr. Graham, Mr. Gavrilatos was just referring to that information, but we can only work on the contacts that we're getting back, our communication and stakeholder engagement with different organisations, as well as talking to those people who contact via phone and via the web, the individual circumstances of what they are finding themselves in and how we can help them. So in terms of the wavering or the rec, as
reports in relation to that hotline are the wait times are greater than 1 hour. What do you say are the wait times as people are calling in to try and get that advice?
Well, Mr. Gavrilatos runs that CEOC every day and works on behalf of us in relation to that space. So I'll ask Mr. Gavrilatos.
So I'll take that one on notice and give you an exact
Thank you.
time. I do not think it's certainly not that sort of.
If you can give us the time, that's the suggestion. If you can give us the time on notice, that's appreciated. Minister, 45 cases resolved. How many are working through the system? How many are yet to be resolved?
Mr. Gavrilatos.
It is not a large number. Sorry, I don't have the figure here in front of me, but it's not a large number.
All right, if we have some notice. And finally, Minister,
12 on hand that we're working through at the moment, in addition to the ones that you mentioned.
All right, and finally, Minister, we've had reports. Here's one example of someone calling in, lodging a complaint, but then being contacted to say the matter would be addressed in the following 30 days. That is the 14 days you're trying to resolve it in, add another 30. Can you also tell us how many cases are in that situation?
I'm certainly not aware of any circumstance where somebody's waiting 30 days. Happy to take that information and follow it up.
Thank you, and I might hand to my colleague.
Minister, your office has been telling stakeholders that the building standards legislation will be debated when Parliament resumes on the 2nd of June. Your colleague, Mr Tudhope, the Leader of the Government in the Upper House, I think confirmed that to the Chamber when we were discussing the sitting calendar. Are you really sitting there telling us that you can't give a straight answer on that question?
Point of order.
Mr.
Point of order.
Searle, happy to talk about the reasons why we're here today.
Point of
Okay,
order.
sorry,
happy-
Minister. Minister, I'm sorry to interrupt. Ms Ward has a point of order.
2 points. One is the procedural fairness resolution, part 9, the manner in which the question was asked. But secondly, the terms of reference of this inquiry in relation to, I don't know how the sitting agenda is in any way relevant, particularly that question. It's not a COVID question. I ask that it be withdrawn.
Well, to the point of order.
I can deal with the relevance point first. There's no question that if the government has said that they want to have a construction-led recovery, that ensuring that the rules are in place is relevant to this inquiry following as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of the gloss that Mr Searle put on his question, I think I might just ask Mr Searle to put it again.
Minister, can you confirm that Parliament will be debating the building standards legislation on 2 June when we resume?
Mr Searle, we're here today to discuss residential tenancies and happy to continue to talk about what we're doing to support the people of New South Wales who find themselves in difficult circumstances due to COVID-19 and the financial impact that residential tenancies are finding themselves in.
I'll
So,
take
Minister,
that as a no then. Thank you.
So, Minister, thank you, Mr Chair. Minister, I have questions that are directly related to the terms of reference around the government's management of COVID-19. I note that you have taken or refused to answer the earlier questions, but I am going to put these to you. My question is in relation.
Courtney, I'm not trying to cause trouble, but Chair, there was a matter that was discussed briefly before. I'm wondering if we could go, even if it extends this by a couple of minutes, I wonder if we can just go offline so I can get some understanding of what's happened, because I'm completely in the dark and I think each member of the committee needs to just work it out. Only take a couple of minutes.
Well, so what I'll suggest is we have a point of order, which I'll take that as a point of order.
Yeah.
And the proposal is we go into a short confidential session to address the point of order. I'm just going to test if we have agreement to very briefly go into a short confidential session during which the live stream will be temporarily paused, and we will put you, Minister, and the officials in the lobby, if that's okay. Do we have consensus for that?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Well then, thank you. We will, sorry, I fell into Green's meeting. We're sorry about that delay. Minister, I can indicate that further questions may be put to you in relation to building regulations based upon that discussion that appears to have been had, at least at one level, between your office and this committee. If given that most of the matters to date have been taken on notice, and it's likely further matters will be taken on notice, we are likely to convene a specific hearing in relation to building regulation in the very near future. I'll go back to the opposition, who have some 3 minutes left in their question time.
Thanks very much, Chair. Minister, I wanted to ask you a question regarding flammable cladding and directly related to our terms of reference about the government's management of COVID-19. Did you advocate for a financial package to address flammable cladding to be included in the government's economic stimulus package?
It's not related to residential tenancies, Ms Hughes. I'm here to talk about that today. I'm happy to take that question on notice.
Okay, I mean, you are a Minister of the Crown. We expect that you can at least give us some general indications, but I'll move on to another question. Minister, the Police Commissioner told us this morning that police have no role in enforcing social distancing, in particular on work sites. Can you tell us how many complaints that Safe Work has received regarding social distancing?
Ms Hughes, I'm here to answer questions in residential tenancies today, and in our capacity in that forum today, happy to take that question on notice.
Okay, well, perhaps you could refer to one of the other officials that is with you today that may be able to provide us with that information.
Happy to take that question on notice, Ms Hughes.
Okay, can you, is one of the officials that's with you today, let me put the question directly to Ms Webb. Ms Webb, how many complaints have Safe Work received regarding social distancing in workplaces across New South Wales?
I'd have to take the number of complaints on notice.
Okay, can you say what is the advice that has been provided to Safe Work around enforcing social distancing on work sites?
I'd have to take that on notice. It's quite a widespread range of advice that we've been given. So take it on notice.
Okay, and if you could provide us with any documents that have been provided, that would be also helpful.
Yes, we can. That's fine, we can do that.
Okay.
I might just jump in.
Oh, sorry, I've just got one final question. Have you received any complaints, Ms Webb? Have you received any complaints?
Me personally, or
yes?
I don't really receive complaints personally.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, my time's expired, but John, if you have one last question, feel free.
Chair, thank you. I might just ask Minister, in relation to residential tenants, some of whom are sitting at home in houses surrounded by flammable cladding, can you give them any update as to what action you've taken over the last 38 weeks?
Mr Graham, thanks for the question. Very happy to take that question on notice, but in terms of those sitting at home in residences that are facing financial impact as a result of COVID, we're doing everything we can to support them via the assistance and support packages that were announced and gazetted on about the 15th of April, with the negotiation, the arbitration, and obviously mediation pathways available to them, and making sure that they're supported in every way they can in that negotiation between tenants and landlords to reduce the financial hardship that they are facing.
Right. Ms Webb, has Qantas taken issue with an improvement notice or other regulatory issues that Safe Work has undertaken? And if you can't answer that, Mr Gavriladis or the Minister.
Mr Shoebridge, I'd have to take the detail of that on notice. I didn't come prepared today, apart from residential tenants. So I'll take it on notice.
Well, you'd be aware there are very substantial concerns amongst the Qantas workforce and others about management at Qantas objecting to regulatory actions being taken by Safe Work. You'd be aware of that?
I think in my previous answer, I indicated that I was aware and mentioned that Safe Work had some interactions with Qantas. The exact detail in relation to the particular notices, I'll have to take on notice.
And Minister, have any representations been made to your office by Qantas management?
Happy to take that on notice, Mr Shoebridge, and come back to you. It is a significant issue, so happy to take it on notice.
Well, rather than asking about the details, has Qantas management approached your office directly?
I'll take that question on notice. Again, we're prepared today on the back of the formal request for residential tenancies, Mr Shoebridge.
Minister, on Tuesday of this week, the Tasmanian Government extended their rent relief package to temporary residents Is the New South Wales Government going to do the same in relation to its Rent Choice Assist COVID-19 response product?
So what we are doing, Mr Shoebridge, in relation to supporting tenants and supporting landlords to get everybody through this very difficult and troubled time, is to provide the pathways for them. And may I say, in relation to tenants and the further support, what we have done with the Parliament's approval was to provide the tenants with a pathway now to go through to the tribunal, so that if a landlord does not proceed...
Yeah, Minister, my question was really about temporary residents. Are you in the process of, or are you about to extend the relief package to temporary residents? And by that I mean their migration status, not their lease status.
Mr Shoebridge, is that in relation to, say, rent choice products that you're talking about now?
Correct. That was my question.
Yeah, thank you. Again, not related to me. That's a matter for Minister Ward. So we're happy to provide any information that you need in relation to residential tenants, but that one needs to be for Mr Ward.
Minister, what, if any, data are you capturing from the dispute resolution process that you've put in place, apart from those some 45 cases that you told us about?
Could you just repeat the question, please? Just to start.
What data are you capturing about agreements being made between landlords and tenants to either defer, to waive, or to reduce rentals? What data are you capturing about all those interactions that are happening out there at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Mr Shoebridge. And Mr Gabrielatos indicated earlier in relation to some of that data being captured, and I'd ask him to further expand on that, please.
So we do capture the outcome of that negotiation between tenant and landlord or agent. So that's captured. We can, as I said earlier, provide information on how many agreements were reached and whether they were a deferral of payment or whether they were, in fact, a waiver of payment.
Are you intending to continue the bond exit survey that Fair Trading is undertaken in order to capture the extent to which COVID-19 is the reason given for the termination of a tenancy? Will you be extending that scheme?
Yeah, look, that's a really important point. What we are continuing to do is to monitor that data, because what it does help us to do is to guide policy going forward, so we can continue to meet the challenges that have come before us. But I'd ask Ms Webb to further elaborate. Mr Tansey. Mr Tansey.
Thank you. I can confirm that the period of the survey was extended beyond its intended finish time, and there were discussions about the usefulness of doing that to start to capture some COVID-affected data. So that has been done. I can't recall right now what the proposed end date of that is.
So why won't you be making that permanent, Minister? We all accept, I assume, that it's capturing relevant data about the impact of COVID-19 on termination of tenancies. Will you commit to making that permanent, the bond exit survey?
What we will commit to doing, Mr Shoebridge, is while COVID continues to impact on our lives, is to focus on the significant challenges and the testing environment that it's putting us under. Our measures at the moment with the assistance and support packages will run until for a 6-month period. We will continue to assess as we get closer toward that period and make the necessary adjustments.
So when will it end?
Well, it came up on the 15th. We were talking about this earlier, Mr Shoebridge. It came up on the 15th when we looked at, it was gazetted on the 15th of April, so 6 months from there. So we're looking at around about the 15th of October for when that period will end. So here we are in May, so we have some months to go. We have a significant team that is backing the efforts of guidance, assistance and support for tenants and landlords going forward. And again, I keep coming back to the data, and you are right, that it is important to capture that data. It is important to learn from what people are telling us, whether it be through the 230,000 web hits or whether
Minister, you're pushing against an open door on the need for good data, which is why I'm asking you as the Minister, will you extend that survey, which is capturing essential data? Will you make that commitment?
Mr. Shoebridge, we will continue to assess the situation as we go forward. Data is important, so we'll assess and we'll make the necessary decisions as we move forward and get closer to toward the end of October, middle of October.
Minister, this crisis is not going to be fixed by October. You accept that, surely? The economic crisis is not going to be fixed by October. If you're just saying you've got measures that expire in October, you're not looking forward, are you? You're not doing your job to looking forward for where this crisis is taking us.
The assistance and support package that was announced by the government is for this period of COVID-19, which was brought back at about the middle of March to kick in on the first 2 weeks of April. So, as you know, this changes on a daily basis, Mr. Shoebridge. You would be well aware of that. So we need to be flexible, we need to be nimble, we need to adapt and respond to challenges in consultation with our community.
Minister,
and stakeholders.
we need to capture the data. And we can't even get a commitment from you here to extending the survey scheme that finds out why people ended their tenancies. You're not even committing to having that as a permanent feature. Do you understand how frustrating that is if you want to have good data to put in place good policy, that you won't even agree to extend that survey?
We're collecting that data now and a range of other streams that inform our policy direction. So it's very important for us to continue that as we work forward. And again, Mr. Shoebridge will assess and will respond accordingly.
Right. Talking about being nimble, the Prime Minister announced the National Cabinet decision to have a moratorium on evictions on the 30th of March. Regulations weren't put in place in New South Wales until the 15th of April. How many people had eviction notices served on them in that time frame?
I don't have that information, Mr. Shoebridge. I'll ask Ms. Webber if she might.
I'm not sure that we would be able to find that out because eviction notices aren't sort of lodged or registered with Fair Trading. We could maybe get something from NCAT, but that would be about all we could find.
All right. And Minister, my final question. For those renters out there in New South Wales who have lost their job or are facing the imminent loss of their job, and they're wondering about their pending potential homelessness, what are you going to offer them apart from the maximum $2,500 package that you've put forward to date? What hope are you going to offer them?
Mr. Shoebridge, what we can say to people that have suffered financial hardship during COVID-19, never before has a government in the history of this nation put forward a package of assistance and support, not only for residential tenancies and people who need that assistance, but also across the board. So our focus in this forum today is the tenants, making sure that they have everything they need to get them through. Now, bearing in mind the changing market, the changing residential market that we find ourselves in, where we're seeing rental vacancies on the rise and we're seeing prices drop across the board. So, and we're seeing negotiations, as we heard from Mr. Gavrilatos, those negotiations are resulting in good outcomes. And those that aren't are working their way through the tribunal. For me, it is about people. It is about putting them first and foremost in everything we do. That is my focus. It will continue to be my focus. We'll make the policy adjustments and change accordingly and respond to the challenges in consultation with those that need it most as we go forward.
Well, Minister, I don't think a rhetorical flourish is going to keep people in their homes, but thank you for your assistance today and for those staff who have come with you. Unfortunately, our time has expired for this round of questioning. We were going to pop you in the electronic lobby, and then you're free to go about your business. And we will then bring Minister Tudor Hope and his officials forward. But thank you again.
Mr. Shoebridge, can I just say thank you for your time and thank you for others who have dialed in today. As I said earlier, it is a continuous improvement exercise from us. Your questions prompt us to think about what we're doing, sharpen our focus and look after the people. And going about my daily business is now another 4.5-hour drive back to Tamworth now, in which I drove down today for this session. Thank you for your time and we'll catch up with you soon. Bye for now.
Travel safe and mind the dust.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Bye for now.